I was surrounded by something that I now call casual negativity. And this is the automatic negative talk and negative self-talk that we use day to day without even thinking about it. I couldn't find anyone out there or any platforms that were speaking to this cultural epidemic that I was seeing, because then once you notice it, you realize it's everywhere. Studies have shown that negative self-talk sinks into your system when there is a seed of belief in it. Your body thinks that self-talk is serving a purpose. It thinks that it is firing up to help you out. It is actually not your inner critic, it's your inner ally that needs a little guidance on how it actually needs to help you. Many times it's a lifelong process. I still have negative self-talk because I am human, but ideally what ends up happening when you work consistently to shift your negative self-talk is the bounce back rate becomes quicker and quicker and quicker.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to another episode of the Get to Know OCD podcast. I am Patrick McGrath, Chief Clinical Officer for Know OCD. If you're looking for help for obsessive compulsive or related disorders, please check us out at knowcd.com, where we have people standing by ready to take your call and set you up with a licensed professional who can help you and who is expertly trained in working with people who have OCD and related conditions. Today on the podcast, we have Katie Horwitch. Hello, Katie. How are you?
Hello, Patrick. I'm doing well. How are you?
I am great, and I am so happy to have you here. You have podcasts. I have podcasts. Look at us, competing podcasts. What's going on here?
Podcasts, OCD, so many overlaps here.
Everyone can get our podcast on the NOCD YouTube channel. Where might they find you? Tell us a little bit about you, what you do, where they can find you, all those great things.
Yeah, so the overarching, let's say slow-moving elevator pitch is that I am an author, I am a speaker, I'm a mindset coach, I am a self-talk activist, and I'm the founder of a platform called Want. Want stands for Women Against Negative Talk, and it's a platform that helps people shift their negative self-talk in a real lasting way. And so part of that multimedia platform is there's a podcast. The podcast is called The Wantcast, the Women Against Negative Talk podcast. And people can find it on iTunes, on Spotify, as they say, wherever they listen to their podcasts. And if they like that and they want even more, my book, Want Yourself, Shift Your Self-Talk, and Unearth the Strength in Who You Were All Along, that if people are watching, they can see in the background. That is available wherever books are sold, and it's available on audiobook.
Fantastic. And were you the reader of the audiobook? Did you do it?
I was.
Yeah. Wow.
I had the best time.
I bet. That's cool. Yeah. I would enjoy that. That would be really fun.
Yeah, it was super fun.
Well, wonderful. Obviously, you didn't just one day wake up and say, I think I'll be a self-talk coach for everyone. There has to be some background to this. What brought you into all of this?
Right? That would be a very, very specific, very niche thing to just wake up one day and decide that you're going to do.
Yeah.
So for me, my story really starts way in the Wayback Machine. When I was in college, I'll preface this by saying that I always had a lot of self-confidence, and I was always a very highly sensitive person and highly sensitive child in particular. So that's not just like, oh, my feelings got hurt. It was really being sensitive to the lights in the room, the energy of the room, all of the different sensory experiences that you have. And so I was very sensitive, and I had a lot of confidence, but the lens through which I viewed that confidence, I describe it as all scratchy and blurred. And that was in part because of what I was ingesting through my sensitivity, especially being a woman walking through the world and being a woman who grew up in the 80s and the 90s. The message really was that confidence was synonymous with vanity, that you can't be too much, that you're pretty much, you can't be too much, but then you're always not enough. These conflicting messages that really came to a head when I was in college. And when I was in college, I developed a whole host of eating and body related disorders that we can also touch upon later in this podcast, I'm sure. But for me, being in college in the early 2000s, I was not able to find the resources that fit the actual description of what I was going through. Because if anybody is listening and was a young adult or adult during that time, the descriptions around eating and body related disorders very similar to how mental health was talked about back then. It's really how it wasn't talked about. There was a lot of lack of conversation, a lot of lack of proper terminology. And so I realized that if I wanted to start to move forward, and because I knew that there was something wrong, I was a musical theater major and it was starting to affect my voice and my physicality. And that
Mm-hmm.
was like the thing to me. So
Sure.
I was like, okay, this is what I want to do with my life. I can't have this thing, whatever it is that I'm going through, stand in the way. And what I decided to do was, because I couldn't find the resources online or through apps, there were no apps, right? We didn't even have smartphones back then. What I figured a good starting place was for myself would to be to get really curious and use that hypersensitivity that I had been gifted with and had sometimes seemed like a burden to figure out how I had gotten to where I was. Because if I could figure out how I got there, then I felt like, well, maybe then I'll know what to do. Maybe then I'll be able to seek out proper next steps. And what I realized during that time, Patrick, was that I started to listen really, really closely to the conversations around me and the way that I responded to them. And I
Mm-hmm.
started to realize that I was surrounded by something that I now call casual negativity. And this is the automatic negative talk and negative self talk that we use day to day without even thinking about it, saying things like, ugh, that was so stupid of me, as emotionless as saying, oh, the sky is blue.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that I had started to learn this language of negative self talk from an early age. And I had learned it and become so fluent in it that, of course, when I got to a situation, being college, being completely in a new element, out of my control, of course, these were the habits and the patterns and the language that I leaned on in those times of uncertainty. And so when I learned about that, I kind of got angry. I got
Mm-hmm.
angry
Mm-hmm.
that I couldn't find anyone out there or any platforms that were speaking to this cultural epidemic that I was seeing. Because
Yeah.
then once you notice it, you realize it's everywhere. And I had this like lightning bulb moment, like cartoon light bulb over my
Bing,
head.
bing, bing, bing. Yeah.
Exactly. It made that sound. Wow, that's crazy that you knew that.
I
Um,
am in your brain, just so you know.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I had this light bulb
Mm-hmm.
moment when I was in that the beginnings of that two-step forward, one step back journey that is recovery. And I saw a commercial that I'm guessing you and the people who are listening will probably remember. It was about 2007. Do you remember the first Dove Real Beauty commercial? It was a group of women and they were all wearing like white camisoles, white
Mm-hmm.
underwear, all ages, all life stages, all body types, all
Yeah.
races. Yeah, it was really the first. Let's forget about even body positive
Right.
commercials. It
Right.
was one
Right.
of the first positive
Yeah.
commercials. It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
one of the first advertisements, mainstream advertisements, that said, hey, you should love yourself. You're
Mm-hmm.
pretty awesome. And also like buy our soap and our
Yeah.
shampoo, but you should love yourself and we believe that you're amazing. And when I
Mm-hmm.
saw that, I thought, A, this is incredible. This is revolutionary. I didn't even know we were allowed to say this. And then I thought, well, what about those times that I can't look at myself in the mirror and just say, I love myself, I'm amazing, I'm awesome? And then that light bulb moment was, I'm going to start a platform that helps people shift their negative self talk with tips and tools. And it's going to be called Want Women Against Negative Talk. So it all came to me like boom, 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 boom.
Okay.
And, I launched it in that period of being in my own journey. And so when I thought of the idea, I knew it was really sticky. I knew I was onto something really special. And also, I put it to the side after launching it in 2007, 2008. I put it to the side for about 7 years after that because I realized, again, high sensitivity, I realized that I wanted to responsibly be someone who could help advocate for shifting your negative self talk and what happens when we actually do that on a cultural and societal level. I knew that I need to figure out my stuff first.
Mhm.
And so it really has been this long, long journey, and it has been probably the most consistent thing in my life. Consistent passion, consistent purpose. It really it's infused in everything I do now.
As you were saying that, I was reminded when I've spoken internationally, people will come up to me at breaks and say, "Why don't Americans like compliments?" Which
Mm-hmm.
sounds funny because the perception a lot of times is of us is very different than that across the world. And the first time I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, if here in our country, if we say something nice to someone, they say thank you, but if we're in the States and we say it, they say no."
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to say it again and they say, "Oh, no, no, no." And then we have to say it a third time and then they go, "Oh, well, okay, thank you." It's
Mm-hmm.
almost like there's a mandatory two-time denial prior to acceptance of something.
Yes, yes. As a lot of the work that I do, especially when I work one on one with people, is around, I don't want to say like learning how to take a compliment, but
Hmm.
really we work around owning your strengths
Yeah,
and celebration because you're right. Then the people who said that are right. Americans in particular, and look, we're both speaking from an American
of course,
standpoint. And
of
so
course.
I'm sure
Hmm.
there are other countries out there that are like
Hmm.
this. But from an American standpoint, we are not great at internalizing compliments, accepting compliments, and celebrating.
Right.
Celebrating, unless it is a celebration that we have gotten multiple proof points of permission that it's able to be celebrated,
Correct.
like a wedding,
Yeah.
like the birth of a child, like these very specific life milestones that it's sort of like, okay, they've gone through the whole internal committee of what is and
Yeah.
isn't worth celebrating. And that leads to a lot of problems and a lot of issues, both personally and interpersonally. It affects
Of course.
everything.
I've I've also seen working with people with anxiety for 25 years, the hatred of compliments because now you've set a standard for me with that compliment. And if I
Mm-hmm.
don't meet it any time in the future, it means I failed.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore I have to achieve that now. That's now my baseline level. And anything below that is an F, just a
Yes.
total failure at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that I have much personal experience with. So like I said, I went to college for musical theater, and that was my professional career until my mid 20s when I started to veer away from it. But that for me, and now knowing that I have and live with OCD, I'm like, oh, this that diagnosis was a surprise to no one
No
but
one.
me. No
Yeah.
one but me. But for me, I really gained my worth from a very early age, from the things that I could give to people. I was someone who had a lot of different talents. So whether that was being artistic with drawing or painting or singing or acting or writing or being a really good listener or being a straight A student, I internalized messages that I needed to create, 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 but it had to be for everybody else and not for myself because that was my currency in this world. That was my currency for connection, my currency for love. But I could never stop to smell the proverbial roses in my own garden. That
Yeah.
was something that was narcissistic, that was vain. And what that did for me is that really trapped me many, many times in that loop that you're talking about, that anxious loop of, if I don't hit this mark, then I've let everybody down, or they're not going to love me. And some of the OCD starts to come in around the hyper catastrophization there. And so that's something that I really, really struggled with. And that the solution to that, doing big, big air quotes here with my fingers, is it's complex and it's nuanced and it's personal and it's an inside job. And it is so much more than, I mean, NoCD does an unbelievable job. Shout out to the NoCD social media manager. They do an incredible job on social media. But for the most part, a lot of what you see on social media when it comes to perfectionism or anxiety or just mental health in general, it can be boiled down to these small sound bites that, when seen over and over and over again, it's very easy to believe, well, this must be the way,
Yeah.
but it's not working for me. So there must be something wrong with me,
Yeah. Well, and that's the problem once people with OCD start opening up about it. The
Mhm.
standard reply is, oh, I have a little bit of that too, which then sends a message to you, which is, well, if everybody has it, why do I have a problem with it? If everybody has it, it must be a good thing. There must really be something wrong with me.
And there's a difference, and I can speak to this because I had this conversation last weekend. There's a difference between talking to someone who says, "Oh, I have a little bit of that," to someone talking to someone else who actually has diagnosed OCD. I will say that my conversation with the person who had actual diagnosed OCD was not, "I have a little of that." The icebreaker was, so what are your subtypes?
Yeah.
You
There
know?
you go. Yeah. Yep. 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 Mhm. You said it was no shock to anyone else but you on the
Mhm.
OCD. How did it finally come into your life? What was the OCD light bulb moment
The
over your head?
OCD light bulb
Yeah.
moment for me. Well, the OCD light bulb moment for me, I do remember when I started to delve more into like body dysmorphia and orthorexia, which is predominantly what I struggled with. When I started to dive into the psychology behind that, I started to learn that there was a correlation oftentimes between eating disorders and OCD. And so,
Hmm. Hmm.
way back then, I sort of clocked it in the back of my brain. And then I think I just forgot about it, because when
Yeah.
it came back into my consciousness as something and I got an actual diagnosis, I was actually seeking out what I thought would be a very different diagnosis. So
Mm-hmm.
this was back in 2021. So this was really still in the pandemic, but not in that first
Yeah.
year mark of 2020. And I was working on my first book. I say first book like I have a second book. It is my only book. I guess that's me
I like
speaking
it.
it into existence, right?
Yes, it's
Um,
coming. It's coming.
yes, I was working on a book that happened to be my first book, and so I was really excited. I was really, really in it. And you'd think I would be super energized, but I was feeling so tired, and not just tired like I need a nap, tired like I feel like I am being dragged slowly by a truck right now. It's like my
Hmm.
entire physicality was just, it felt like it shut down. And so I spoke to my primary care physician. We did all of the blood work, thyroid panels, stuff like that, and everything for the most part came up pretty normal. I mean, the one thing she was like, you could try taking iron pills like when you're around your cycle, and I was like, okay, well, I did that, and that didn't really help. And so we talked, and I said I would love to talk to a psychiatrist to maybe see if there's something going on with my mental health that could
Hmm.
be contributing to this. And she agreed. She thought that was a great idea, and so she
Hmm.
referred me to a psychiatrist. And I got, anybody who's been diagnosed with OCD will probably relate to this. So it was a Zoom meeting,
Hmm.
and I got an intake form from this psychiatrist, and it was a long, 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 long form. I spent so long on that form, so long. And not just because it was a long form, like really took so much time because I wanted to be sure that I was describing exactly what I was
Oh.
going through and that I wasn't kidding myself. I wasn't lying to myself, that I was being so super honest. And then we get on the call. And this wonderful human, I'm so happy that I was paired with someone who was so straightforward. I start answering questions, and then he says to me, tell me more about that because what you just said doesn't match the answer that you gave on the form. And then I went into this long explanation of, well, sometimes I this and this. Like, I really wanted him to understand all of the nuances so I could get a clear diagnosis. And I thought it was going to be some cocktail of anxiety and depression. And
Mhm.
at the very end of the call, he said, so, based on what you just described in our session today and all of your answers, I am sensing you have generalized anxiety and flavors of OCD.
Mhm.
And I had never heard that term before. And so, of course, I was like, flavors, like mint chip?
Yeah,
He didn't
right.
think it was funny.
I like it.
And I said, okay, interesting. And as I was thinking, I was like, oh, that makes sense. And he said, yeah, also with your history with with food, with body. He reiterated what I had found way, way, way back, that those two are interconnected many times. And
Mhm.
he said, as far as moving forward, he was like, look, you are very what we call textbook high functioning. You are getting out of the house, you are
Mhm.
living your life, you are writing a book, you are, on paper very successful. And so you can go one of many different ways. He said, you have this information right now, you can sit with it and do nothing with it right now and have the awareness and, move forward. He said, if you want, you can start medication, which I thought he described it so wonderfully. He said to me, you have towels in your bathroom, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, you weren't just thinking about those towels until I told you about the towels in your bathroom, right? And I said, yeah, of course. And he said, that's what medication is able to do for many people.
Yeah.
Those thoughts, the stuff is still there, but you're not thinking, it's not top of mind all of the time. It sort of clears that space.
Mhm.
So I thought that was, sometimes people can be really, really anti any type of treatment. They could be anti therapy, they could be anti medication. I really appreciated that I was with someone who really seemed to embrace all different types of treatment, which allowed me a sense of confidence and autonomy of how I moved forward. And then he also said there's also certain types of therapy that are really, really geared toward OCD, and that's something that you could start too. And I said, okay, I think I want to sit with this and just
Sure.
process it for a while.
Sure.
And then, of course, I believe that's when I found NoCD and when the algorithm TM started to push no CD
Yeah.
content
Yeah.
into my feed because it
Uh,
was like, we know this about you
yeah.
now.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I really like the knowledge of what was going on was enough until it wasn't. And that
Sure.
was about a year later. And that's
Okay.
when I was getting really into the
Mhm.
publicity portion, or the pre-publicity of marketing the book. And
Yeah.
I realized that I was so tired again. And I was spending literal hours, sometimes an entire day, trying to write one email that was 2 sentences long, asking if someone would like blurb my book. And I
Mhm.
thought, you know what? I have not come this far to just come this far.
Right.
And
Right.
that's when I sought out NoCD. I did treatment through you all. I graduated just as the book came out. And it has been a life changing experience.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled. I mean, it's one of the reasons I do what I do. I
Mhm.
love these stories where people find the right treatment, apply it, and see the results because they can be amazing
Yes.
turnarounds in people's lives.
Totally. And
Mhm.
I love that. I love that your team in particular, and many teams that are really OCD specific,
Mhm.
they're so tuned into the nuances of OCD, because I have definitely, and I'm sure you've heard hundreds and thousands more than I have, but I've definitely heard stories from people who have either gotten misdiagnosed, who have, gosh, I just recently heard a story about how one person, like, shared one of their intrusive thoughts with a therapist that was not specialized in OCD, and the therapist like called the police. I
Mhm.
mean, it's heartbreaking, and it
It
makes
is.
sense that
Mhm.
with OCD and with many mental illnesses, there's such a stigma. It's cliche to say that there's such a stigma, but it's a cliche because it's true. And there's so much misunderstanding, and because of that, there's so much shame. And
Yeah.
there's so much shame when it comes to the individuals. There's so much shame when it comes to sharing with who would otherwise be their closest loved ones. There's so much shame around seeking treatment. And for me, I feel like I'm so grateful that I am the personality type who geeks out about getting more information about herself. Like, I can't wait to start getting mammograms. Like, I'm so grateful for healthcare, including mental health care, because mental health is health, period.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I'm
Mhm.
really grateful that I was able to go into this process seeing all of this as just information that I can use to help myself be the person that I know I'm meant to be. And so if I'm lucky enough to have that chip in my brain, I am so passionate, whether people have diagnosed OCD or mental illnesses or whatever. I am so passionate about helping people gather that information about themselves and feel empowered with it instead of ashamed or frightened.
Sure. OCD is kind of a jerk. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not surprising you in that statement, I'm sure. And you talk so much about negative self talk. And boy, if there's a champion of negative self talk, it's obsessive compulsive disorder, because
Yeah.
never once does it say you did anything good or well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's constantly reminding you of every potential failure or something. So, as you look back now on your life up to your diagnosis and what you've now done with your career,
Mm-hmm.
how for you does OCD and negative talk just interact and then play a role in what you want to get out there in the future also?
Yeah. So I describe the relationship between negative self talk and OCD very similar to the way that sometimes people will say, I feel anxious or I feel depressed, and they don't necessarily have a clinical anxiety disorder or have clinical depression.
Mhm.
Everybody feels anxious at times.
Sure.
Everybody feels depressed at times.
Yep.
Everybody has negative self talk.
Yep.
Not everybody has depression, anxiety, capital A, or OCD. And
Right.
so for me, I really specialize in what I call just the human experience of negative self-talk. And when it comes to OCD, what I try and stress to people is that negative self-talk is oftentimes the commentary on the intrusive thought or the feeling of extreme catastrophization, and those two, they love each other, right? Because if something negative self-talk from and there's research that shows this, studies have shown that negative self-talk sinks into your system when there is a seed of belief in it. So if we're talking about positive self-talk, and self-talk isn't inherently good or bad, it's information. But
Right.
if we're talking about positive self-talk, the reason why affirmations and mantras don't work for many people is because they don't believe them. And so what
Right.
happens in the brain is a form of cognitive dissonance, because you're saying this thing that you don't believe, then you feel like you're a liar, and that doesn't feel good. However, with someone who has OCD, that intrusive thought and that feeling of extreme catastrophization, it takes over so much that that negative self-talk around that, it is very, very easy to believe. And
Hmm.
so especially when I work with individuals, I, as someone who A, has OCD, and B, is a certified mindset coach, I listen very, very closely for patterns and for the ways that they talk about things. And I listen for that catastrophization, and I listen for loops that seem consistently outsized. And now I do this, I also, one of the bajillion things I do is I teach fitness. I'm very, very adamant about staying in one's lane of expertise. I
Hmm.
am not an OCD therapist, just like I am not a nutritionist. However, as a group fitness professional who's been in the industry for 17 years. I got into it as a side career when I was acting. I get a lot of people who come to me and ask for nutrition advice. That is not my expertise. That is
Right.
not mine to give. And so I have a whole Rolodex of people who have that experience that I can refer out to. Similar with OCD and different mental illnesses, if I sense that there might be something going on that's outside of my area of expertise,
Yeah.
or if we're working on the self talk and it's just really, really not going anywhere, and I learn that it's about different intrusive thoughts, different patterns, different things that maybe seem illogical to other people, and then the person is like, gosh, why can't I get over this, why can't I figure it out? I have mental health professionals that I can refer out to, because we need community, and that includes the team of people that we A, refer out to as professionals, and B, that we look to for professional guidance. You wouldn't just go to, if you have, I don't know, if you have a dermatologist that you love, you're not going to go to your dermatologist for every single thing just
Yeah.
because
Your
just
broken
because
ankle. Yeah.
yeah, just
Yeah.
because you like love your dermatologist
Yeah.
and you feel like they really get you. It's
Hmm.
important to have that type of mental health community around you as well.
Yes. I appreciate that so much, and it's something I too believe. Someone asked me in a webinar the other night a question about hallucinations and quasi hallucinations, and on the webinar I said, "Listen, I'm not the person to ask that
Yeah.
question. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah. I'm not the
that's not what I
hallucination guy.
specialize. Yeah,
Yeah.
I got an OCD question. I'm all over it, but
Right.
let me find someone who could help you with that. I always appreciate when professionals, as you said, know their lane. And
Yes.
yeah, I don't think you can trust people who say they're an expert in everything, or that they
No.
know more about something, and it's 30, 40 things. And that's why I've not even liked a lot of advertising of therapists, because if you go to a certain website that lists a lot of therapists, they'll say they
Mhm.
specialize in 40 things. And I was like, no, you can't. That's impossible. And I
Mhm.
think that it's sending a lot of false information out there. And it's also potentially why a lot of people think they're going to a specialist and they're really not.
Yes. I like to say, if you're good for everyone, you're great for no one.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree totally.
Mhm.
So people are coming to you, they have this negative talk.
Mhm.
Um, what are just some general steps that you will work on getting people to first be able to recognize their own negative talk? Because by the time they come to see you, I'm assuming it's just so ingrained to them, they don't necessarily even notice it anymore.
Yeah, I think that there's two different types of people who come to me. There's the people who are very aware
Hmm.
of that they're feeling let's just call it the umbrella term of negative,
Okay.
or they're feeling down, or and they want to be able to feel energized throughout the day. They want to feel good about themselves. They feel themselves holding themselves back, but it's a little bit obtuse and amorphous of what actually it is that they want to hone in on. And then
Hmm.
there's people who come to me for more like almost leadership and goal coaching type work.
Okay.
And that is people who want to leave a job or get a job, people who want to start dating, they haven't dated in a while, want to make a pivot in their career, want to change something up, and they have an idea of what they want to do, and they can't necessarily figure out what the steps are to get there. And that actually, to me, is one of my favorite types of clients to work with, because then we're uncovering all of these different things that, like you said, they don't even realize that they've been doing along the way when it comes to these stories that they tell themselves about themselves as they walk through the world. So everything from self-doubt to imposter syndrome, which I have a lot of feelings about, fears, what will other people thinks. And what we really do is we look at things holistically, like in the macro and in the micro.
Mhm.
And I really like to get clear on, especially with the people who say that well, actually, I'm going to take this back. When people say that they don't want to be a certain way, we spend a lot of time getting clear on how they do want to be, because
Mhm. Mhm.
usually they have spent an outsized amount of time thinking about all the things that they don't want to do, all the ways that they don't want to be living. However, when it comes to what they do want, they're unclear.
Yeah.
Their answer is, well, not this. And so
Yeah.
a lot of that work is around, okay, let's get really clear on what you want and how you want to feel, and how you want to feel, especially if there's a specific thing that's attached, like let's say a
Sure.
job or a move. How do you want to feel after that thing happens? It's like when people say, I feel like I'm not enough. And it's like, okay, well, what does enough mean to you? What does
Yeah.
that look like, sound like, feel like? And a lot of people haven't done that work, and also aren't aware of the patterns that they use to talk about and to describe what they want. I hear a lot of justs, a lot of onlys, a lot of little, a lot of minimizing when it comes to the things that people actually want, which goes back to our earlier part of the conversation when it comes to accepting a compliment and
Mhm.
celebrating.
Mhm.
So we get really, really clear at the very beginning of why are we actually here? What are we going towards? And a lot of people are people, at least people who come to me, they're people who have multiple passions, multiple interests in their life, or they have been so laser focused in one area of their life for so long that they don't even know what lights them up beyond that anymore. Maybe they've been, I don't know, maybe they've been in the legal profession for 30 years, and they're like, I don't even know, if that wasn't here tomorrow and I could do whatever I want, I don't know what I would do, and I don't know how I would live my life. And so it's really about getting curious about how you want to be, and then working backwards from there and figuring out what I call your through line for what everything that you do. What is the common theme in everything you love and the common goal in everything you do? And that's different than a personal mission statement.
Sure.
That's different than an about on your website. This is
Yeah.
really the commonality between all of these different things that make you you. And so we really work from there on creating this cohesive experience that also like makes you a very specific person with specific wants, and also opens the world up to you.
Sure. Katie, it's interesting when you say that, because I could think then of people maybe staying in relationships longer than they want to because they know what they don't like about this relationship, but they don't know what they want in a new one as much,
Hmm.
right? Or
Hmm.
or in a job and not retiring because they don't know what it would be like once they retire and to not go to work every day.
Yes.
And so maybe the devil for a lot of people is much better than the devil you don't know.
Was
Do you see that?
literally just
Yeah.
thinking that exact phrase. That
Yeah.
holds a lot of people back, because
Yeah.
we as humans, we love consistency, we love certainty, we love knowing what is going to happen next, which is why OCD can be so debilitating for
The
so
doubting
many
disorder.
people.
There it is. Yeah.
The doubting disorder of
Hmm.
extreme catastrophization.
Yes,
Like
yes, yes,
it's
yes.
a perfect storm. But we developed these tools to help us way back in the day when we were just evolving as human beings. We learned how to be afraid. We learned how to stick close to the people that we knew so
Hmm.
that we would literally not get eaten by bears
Yeah,
in the forest, And
right.
so it's also this whole process of shifting your negative self talk is recognizing that a lot of people will call their negative self-talk, they'll call it their inner critic, their inner mean girl. I really work with people on internalizing that your body thinks that that self-talk is serving a purpose.
Yeah,
It thinks that it is firing up to help you out. It is actually not your inner critic, it's your inner ally that needs a little guidance on how it actually needs to help you. And that, like we said, is a long process, and many times it's a lifelong process. I still have negative self-talk because I am human, I am not a robot. But ideally, what ends up happening when you work consistently to shift your negative self-talk is the bounce back rate becomes quicker and quicker and quicker. Very similar to OCD, when you have an intrusive thought and then you have the tools that maybe you learned in ERP to be able to counter that thought and move forward. So that turnaround time and that bounce back becomes quicker and quicker and quicker.
one of the things, and maybe you saw this, and I'm interested in, as you were going through therapy on this,
Mm-hmm.
OCD can present itself as, hey, do what I'm telling you to do, and I'm going to help you, right? I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
make everything better. These compulsions are really designed in order to keep you safe.
Yes.
What was it like to break that cycle for you?
Oh, well, I could not have done it without I will not name names because of confidentiality, but they know who they are if they're listening to this. I could not have done it without my therapist, who is just wonderful. Um for me, a lot of my obsessions were maybe invisible to the
Yeah,
naked eye. I was not someone who had I don't have like extreme catastrophe or not catastrophization, contamination
right.
OCD,
Sure.
where that is something that of course we've seen in movies, in media, that really is a subtype of OCD that has been exploited and
Overdone. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
misrepresented, let's call it that. For me, it was I dealt with a lot of relationship OCD. And so one big one for me, for example, it wasn't necessarily relationship with my husband, although sometimes that would come up too, but it was my platonic relationships,
Hmm.
my friendships, my closest friendships. And leaving a meal with them or hanging out with them and then going into the intrusive thought spiral of they are never going to want to talk to me again. A lot of false memory stuff coming in of, did I say this thing? Did I say it this way? Do I not remember that I did this thing? And so for me, the compulsions for that were a lot of reassurance,
Yeah.
which, of course, I mean, and that's a hard compulsion to have support breaking, right? Because people want to help you, they want to reassure you. And so a lot of that has to be on you as the person who is seeking treatment to move forward to not perform those compulsions. For
Right.
me, and this is just one example of multiple. So I had lots of fears of losing relationships or reputation being damaged. I had fears of like going to jail if I didn't do something a specific way. For me, when it came to, let's use the relationship one, for example, my friend related intrusive thoughts. A, right away, I think it was even before I started treatment. I told my closest friends, I was like, oh my gosh, you'll never believe what I got diagnosed with, OCD. And they're like, oh, that makes sense.
We believe it. Yeah, we
Yeah.
believe
And so to
it.
have that
Yeah,
type of response, again, like so lucky, so
yeah,
blessed, but really owning that without saying that it was something that I was scared or ashamed of, just putting it out there, being like, just like I would say, I have brown hair, saying I have OCD. It's just a trait. It's just a part of me. It doesn't define me. It's one of many parts. That really helped to begin with. And then there would be times when I would want to text or call and have some long reassurance conversation. That was something that I was able to, again, with the help of my therapist. And if people have not gone through NOCD therapy yet, the app is incredible, and I use it to this day
it's wonderful.
to look at the different categories of, I could be like, oh, this falls under the category of the intrusive thought of I am or will be misperceived. That was a big
Hmm.
one that we landed on, and that was a
Okay.
very high distress level. And then if something was happening in the moment, I would actually describe to people, I'd say, so what's going on in my brain right now is I am thinking this, 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 and this. Don't reassure me, and I'm not going to ask you for reassurance, but isn't this interesting? This is what OCD does. And so
Hmm.
I almost approached it like an observer, of observing what the OCD was doing, and that took practice, and I
Sure.
did not get it right every single time, but you can't make progress unless you practice. Like, practice doesn't make perfect, and we don't want to talk about perfection with OCD anyway. So practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes progress. And for me, that was something that really helped, and
Yeah.
really helped me take my power back.
What I say in my first book, I'll go
Mhm.
with you on in my first book.
Yes.
I say practice makes routine.
Yes.
The
Yes.
more you practice something, the more likely you are to do it. And
Hmm.
so sometimes you could practice things in a way that it makes the behavior get worse, and sometimes
Right.
you practice a way that it gets better. So it is it is all about how you practice and what you're practicing and what
Yes.
direction that practice will take you. So I just
Yes.
always say practice makes routine.
Yes, yes. Habits become habits because you do them habitually.
There you
And
go.
the
Hmm.
good news is that if you are in so strongly in a habit in one direction, congratulations.
Yeah.
You know how to create a habit. So
Yep.
let's start creating a new one.
The other thing that you said, I just wanted to pull back on because I think it's important for a lot of folks that there might be, and again, through movies and media, this notion that people with OCD, boy, they're stuck in the bathroom all the time. They're washing their hands. And you talked about this idea of a high functioning. And
Mhm.
and I think it's important to show folks that OCD isn't just like what's in the movies or portrayed on television, where it's something that
Mhm.
you're always going to see, that you can do things, you can go to work, like you said, but you can also be constantly doubting in your head and stuck in so many mental compulsions that no
Yes.
one else might actually see you doing anything. And yet OCD is very much going on in the background of your life.
Yes. And that was 1000%. I mean, maybe 999% the types of OCD that were
Mhm.
making me so exhausted. I remember that psychiatrist said, "It's no wonder that you're so tired all of the time, Katie. You you are working so hard on a daily basis, and you shouldn't have to work that hard every single day." But it was because it was so many mental obsessions, and many times, whether it was a mental compulsion or a compulsion that I performed out loud, even if it was, innocuous to someone else, whether it was sending a text or whatever,
Yeah.
um, there was so much mental work that went into it.
Yeah.
And that is something that I I can see how, and I'm being gentle with my words here, because I can get really annoyed when people say like, "Oh, my whatever health issue that they're going through. Like, oh, it was such a gift. Like, that is not helpful for many people who are deep in their struggles, and they're kind of like, I don't know if I can curse on this podcast, but
You can go for it.
they're
Do
like,
it.
fuck you. Like, that is not a gift. Like, this was not a blessing. I will say that I can recognize the sort of middle of the Venn diagram of
Hmm.
my high sensitivity and the way that I describe myself as a professional noticer
Yeah.
and my OCD. And that is something that that makes me me. And so
Yeah.
now, with this information of I have OCD, I have these tools because I've gone through your incredible program. And there are many tools out there now. We're so blessed to live in a time right now where there's a lot of shit talking about the internet, but there's some really, really amazing things available, especially when it comes to mental health.
Yes.
I know that just like with anything, nothing is either just good or just bad. It's
Yeah.
like I can recognize when things start to go over into that dark territory, but that doesn't mean that I shut down all of this good sensitivity over here. So it's really about living in that middle ground and living in that area of leaning into what serves me and developing the team, developing the habits, developing the resources, and seeking out the resources to make sure that I can keep moving forward and being proactive
Yep.
instead of reactive and held captive by this disorder.
And you have confirmed what everyone else who's been on here with OCD has said. I wouldn't want to give this to my worst enemy because it's a hellish, hellish thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes against the idea that people have in pop culture, which is, wouldn't it be great if we just had a little OCD?
Right.
And that is something, and one of the reasons I do this podcast, because I want to keep correcting that no, it wouldn't be great to have a little OCD. You would hate it. It would be
Yeah.
terrible. And, and let's just not go there anymore, because I don't know of any other mental health conditions we say, wouldn't it be great just to have a little bit of this in
Right.
order to make my life better?
Right. And the more that, we can have conversations like this,
Yeah.
or we can feel empowered and solid enough to explain to people what is happening. I explained an intrusive thought to my mom the other day, and she was like, "Oh, Katie, that's extreme." And I was like, "Yeah, that's OCD." The more just explaining to people that when we talk about OCD awareness, that is what it means. It doesn't necessarily mean posting a meme or a color. It
Right.
really, like, it means giving people the awareness that something exists, because you can't shift what you don't know exists, and you can't help support people, because at the end of the day, the people who love you, I mean, if they really love you, they want to support you. They don't want
Yeah.
to hurt you. Um, a lot of times, you need to help people along with that support, and that's not a bad thing. People can't read your minds. People can't step into your shoes fully. And so, the more awareness we can spread within our micro communities, the more macro difference we can make.
Katie, there's someone out there watching this who's on the fence about therapy and getting started in this. What do you say to them?
Oh my gosh. First of all, I say that it is the best thing that, if not I have ever done, that I have definitely done in the last 10 years. I think that if people are on the fence, first of all, I always say to people, whether it is about therapy or a new job or moving, I'm like, let's see. Let's just see. You might hate it. It might not work. It might not be for you, but let's see. Because you
Hmm.
won't know until you know. And the
Hmm.
only way
Hmm.
to know is to test the waters and go in. So I would go in as like a if you're feeling hesitant, if you could start to think of it as like you're collecting data to see what will work for you. Maybe therapy is not your thing, but let's see.
Hmm.
That being said, I will say that having a therapist who understands the nuances of what you are going through, and NoCD in particular, you all do a really wonderful job at pairing your people with therapists. I also want to state that you say right off the bat, if you're not vibing with your therapist, we will switch you out. No harm,
Hmm.
no foul. I think that
Hmm.
that's something that especially people who have relationship type OCD will worry about, of like, am I going
Hmm.
to hurt my therapist's
Hmm.
feelings? Am I going to be blacklisted in the system?
Right.
um, there are so many resources there that are available to you. It feels incredible to feel seen. And I will say, from the other side of, I played I played Pomp and Circumstance on my phone on my last day of treatment, for me and my therapist. That's the type of relationship we had.
Yeah.
Um, it feels it feels like you are maybe one of the strongest, most self assured versions of yourself once you have these tools that you didn't even know that you needed. So just try it out. Say,
Yeah.
let's see what it's like. And I would bet you that there's gonna be, it's a new thing. And so, of course, you feel tentative because it's new. It's not necessarily scary because of the therapy itself. Recognize that maybe it is, but there's also a part of you that is scared because, like we talked about, it's a new thing that you're bringing into your life that has not been there before. Um, but I
Yeah.
would be very surprised if you didn't feel freaking so happy to be yourself at the very end, when you hit that that like, oh, okay, cool, I think that we're good day.
Katie Horwitch, it's been a joy to be with you. Give everyone a little shout out again of where they can find all your information.
Yes, I would love to stay connected to everybody who's listening to this podcast right now. And thank you so much for having me on. This was an absolute joy. So, people can find me on social media at Katie Horwitch. It's just my name, Horwitch. They can also find me at womenagainstnegativetalk.com. They can find my podcast, The Wantcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, and my book, Want Yourself, Shift Your Negative Self Talk, or Shift Your Self Talk and Unearth the Strength in Who You Were All Along, is available wherever books are sold and wherever audiobooks are.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us once again for another episode of the Get to Know OCD podcast. If you liked what you heard today, subscribe to the NOCD YouTube channel or wherever you like to get your podcast. Boy, that sounds familiar. Didn't we just say that with you? I think that sounds familiar. And if you're looking for help for OCD or related conditions, go to NOCD.com. That's NOCD.com. We'll meet with you. We'll pair you with an expert who's trained in exposure and response prevention, the number one treatment for OCD, and we will make sure that you get the help that you need. So, NoCD.com. We look forward to working with you and helping you on that journey. Thanks again. We'll see you soon. Bye, everyone.